Let's bring in Uwaleke, who is the president of Capital Market Academics of Nigeria and a professor of capital market at Nasarawa State University. Thank you so much, Professor, for being on the news tonight. We do appreciate your time.
Thanks, as well.
I'm tempted to ask you about the MPC and ask if you were surprised. Any surprises there, considering some recent decisions, including the rebasing of the CPI.
Yes.
But the CBN says its decision was driven by improved market stability. And then my other question would now be, with inflation still a problem? Because even Mr. Cardoso himself says we're cautionary in our outlook when it comes to inflation. So with inflation still a concern, is this really a right time to hold the rates?
Oh yes, it's the right time to hold the rates. I wasn't surprised. It didn't come as a surprise at all. As a matter of fact, many analysts that were interviewed gave that opinion that the MPC was going to hold. And you can also see it in the decision that they made. All 12 members unanimously voted for a hold position. And rightly so. You notice that majorly what the central bank considered in taking decisions, the MPC of the central bank in taking decision, basically two. You talk about the three prices. The central bank, want to use interest rate, one of the prices, to influence the direction of the other two prices, namely inflation and then exchange rate. Then you talk about exchange rate. You heard him say that there has been stability, in exchange rate, and that's true, and that's more because of some of the measures central bank, put in place. Talking about the forex, matching system, talking about even the forex code. Okay, the two combine to improve the transparency we have in the market and to a large extent also stabilize the exchange rate. Now, you also look at the inflation figure. Even before the rebasing, there was this consensus that the January inflation number would even moderate, below the 34.8%, that was recorded. Okay. Then the rebasing now came to now show that with the reclassification that they did and with the update in the base year, okay, the number is now around 24.48. I think all of that combined to influence that decision. And if you also look at what they consider from the global perspective, okay, they also don't see that as a major downside risk to inflation, even though it was identified. They talked about the protectionism in the U.S., as it were, the tariffs, and of course the counter that about to happen. Of course, all those are risks, but they may not manifest in the immediate, and that's why they chose to hold. And they are also not in a hurry to change this position, because then the next meeting is not in March, it's in May.
Exactly. That's what, because this meeting actually was supposed to be in January,
and another one in March.
Supposed to be last week, and before they put it today. And we're supposed to have the next one March or even April, but they're waiting up until May. The governor says they are still looking deeply into this CPI rebasing. I wanted to ask you, how should Nigerians interpret these new inflation figures, and what does this mean, the holding, for businesses that are wanting to expand in 2025?
First, you notice that again, central bank tries to worry when inflation rate is higher than the policy rates. They tell you that their goal is to have a positive real interest rate. So all along we've had a case where inflation higher than policy rate. Policy rate 27.5, inflation at 34.8. Of course is negative, but all around us, in many countries of the world, the ideal is inflation to stay below the policy rate. So now that we have a new figure for inflation, 24.48, and policy rate is at 27.5, it would appear that, of course, the real interest rate is positive. So central bank will worry less because real interest rate is positive. Now, what does it mean? You're saying how should it be interpreted? The point remains, and I also want to agree with what he said, that the current inflation figure, again, in my view, would tend to capture the reality, reflect the current inflationary pressure, and that's because of the fact that the current figure is no longer using a base year that's as far back as 2009. The base year is now as
2024,
so as close to the current year as possible. So you want the base year to be very close so that it can capture, current inflationary, pressure. Now, they have also used a modern classification system as opposed to the one they were using before, 1999, COICOP, the classification of individual consumption according to purpose, 1999. They used the 2018 classification based on 13 classification. So what they have done now is to reduce the weight for food from 52% to 40%. Okay, but again, you notice that food component shows up in restaurants, meals away from home. The weight for transport has also increased. So for me going forward, the way now to look at inflation is again to continue to deal with the food issue because the pressure is still there.
Indeed.
Okay?
I mean, it does
and
look
then
like
the transport too, the cost of transport is also a problem. So if you can reduce the cost of transport, significantly, because most of the time you find, yes, farmers are even the ones that even produce. I hear, for example, in Benue, you see people produce yams, but to move those yams from the farms to the farm gate to market, becomes an issue because of the cost of transport. So if you can fix the infrastructure, road infrastructure, and also reduce the cost of transport, particularly the pump price of fuel, that will go a long way to bring down inflation. And the good thing again that was also mentioned in that communique is that on the fiscal side, the production output in terms of oil has also improved, 1.5 million barrels per day, which is an improvement over what we used to have.
Professor, it does look like, and I'm glad you brought in food. Food seems to be the biggest headache for monetary authorities and even the fiscal authorities at the moment. When you talk about that basket, it still amounts to about 40% of that basket. So you wonder how effective are the government measures really to stabilize the inflation when food is still, exerting upward pressures on it. That's one. On the other hand, we've heard manufacturers and businesses complain about the interest rate. They want it cut. They want it down because it's choking businesses. But when you hear the CBN, the MPC withholding at the moment, you wonder if the CBN is too focused on inflation at the expense of the real economy. What's your thought on that?
Okay, well, yes, the central bank, of course, has a mandate, a primary mandate of maintaining, price stability. But I've also always argued that mandate too should also be within the context of, macroeconomic goals. When you talk about macroeconomic goals, it's not just about price stability. You're also talking about output, right? You're also talking about, employment, full employment. So all these are macroeconomic goals that must be taken together and pursued together. Okay, so it doesn't seem as if one, if you like, one agency of government is, attempting to clap with one hand.
Yes.
You don't clap with one hand. So that is why I'm happy that central bank has started by, holding. I want to believe that before the end of the year, in the course of the year, central bank may see the need to change its stance completely from the aggressive policy rate hikes, a tightening measure, to possibly accommodative measure, because just as you rightly mentioned, interest rates, is still high in Nigeria. Policy rate 27.5%. That's about the highest in sub-Saharan Africa. Ghana is 27%. The cash reserve ratio is also high at 50%. For deposit money banks, 16% for merchant banks. Okay, again, it's very high. I would also want the central bank, maybe MPC of the central bank going forward, to also take a second look at the asymmetric corridor. I also think that asymmetric corridor is also not in the interest of output growth, because you have plus 500 minus 100. That means the effective lending rate, by the central bank to the banks is not just 27.5, but 27.5 plus 5. So it's above 30%. So I think that is on the high side. Then you have liquidity ratio at 30%. So when you take all that together, okay, it simply translates to, of course, high cost of funds on the part of, businesses. And there's also something we should realize. Most rates revolve around the MPR. Of course, that's why it's the anchor. That's why you find even the CBN guide, says that lending rates should be anchored on the MPR, even when it is negotiable. It says savings rate should be a minimum of 30% of MPR. So you see, they are all revolving around the MPR. And that's why, going forward, the MPC, okay, by the time they meet in May, I want to expect that they should also consider reducing, you know, the policy rate. But from what you have said is very key. Food is very key. The fiscal must, you know, be involved. Insecurity, of course, you can't, you know, overemphasize that. That has to be dealt with so that farmers can have, the freedom to go to farms.
Indeed.
Well, great place to leave it. Mr. Uche Uwaleke, who is a professor, capital market at Nasarawa State University. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsnight.